left for dead. Dust choked the air as the wagon creaked over uneven ground, its wheels groaning like the dying breath of a promise long broken. Eliza Granger sat hunched on the splintered bench, one hand pressed gently against her swollen belly, the other clutching the edge of the seat. Her eyes, once bright with hope, now stared blankly at the path ahead, though she saw nothing but the ruins of her trust. Her husband, Thomas Granger, rode on horseback just ahead, his figure stiff and distant, as though even the trail dust dared not cling to him. He hadn't looked at her in miles. Not since the argument that morning when she had dared to question the dwindling money, the lies, and the bruised knuckles that came from too many nights in smoky backrooms gambling their future away. Soon, he had said, avoiding her gaze. We'll reach the outpost. There's shelter, food. But she knew that voice now, slick with charm, hollow with deceit. The same voice that once vowed to love and protect her had learned to twist truth into a blade. The sun sagged low in the sky when they finally stopped. No outpost, no town, just a forgotten clearing surrounded by silent trees and whispering grass. Eliza stepped down, wincing. Her back ached from the weight of pregnancy and the road. Thomas handed her a canteen. Rest a bit. I'll check the perimeter. Might be coyotes. Eliza took the canteen, grateful for even this crumb of civility. She watched him disappear into the trees, her heartbeat slow and dull, the kind of rhythm that comes before a storm, when you know something terrible waits on the other side of quiet. Time passed. The sky darkened, and then came the crack of a branch. She turned, expecting Thomas, but saw only shadows. Something was wrong. A rustle, a sudden chill. Then, pain. A blow to the back of her head. Bright light exploded behind her eyes. The ground rushed up. She collapsed into the dirt, tasting blood, smelling earth, hearing footsteps retreat, running, not helping. A whisper reached her before unconsciousness took hold. I'm sorry, Eliza, but you were never part of the plan. Night swallowed the world. She awoke hours later, or perhaps minutes. Time had dissolved into agony and confusion. Her body throbbed, her vision blurred. She tried to call for help, but only a dry rasp escaped her throat. The baby. She reached for her stomach. Still, no blood. Still alive. A flicker of relief. Above her, stars blinked coldly, indifferent. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled, mournful, lonely, eerily human. And then, hoofbeats. At first, she thought it a trick of the wind, a cruel echo. But they grew louder, steadier, closer. A silhouette emerged from the darkness, a tall figure on horseback, long braids trailing over his shoulders, posture rigid with alertness. He dismounted swiftly, knelt beside her. Warm hands pressed her pulse, lifted her gently. She tried to speak, but the world tilted again. As she faded once more into blackness, she heard the stranger speak, not in English, but in a tongue softer than thunder, stronger than wind. Her last thought before the void returned was strange, foolish. This is not where I die. A stranger's kindness. Warmth. Soft, radiant, unlike anything she'd felt in days. Eliza stayed, eyelids fluttering against the flickering light that danced across the walls of a small lodge. The scent of burning sage and pine resin lingered in the air, clean and earthy. Somewhere close, water trickled gently, and outside, a distant hum of wind passed through tall trees. She shifted slightly. Pain flayed in her ribs, and her breath caught. A gasp escaped her cracked lips. Instantly, movement. A young woman entered, no older than 20, her hair in two thick braids tied with leather cords. Her expression was gentle, her hands swift as she knelt by the bedside. You're safe, the girl said in accented but fluent English. My name is Ahioka. You are in our camp. My brother found you. Eliza tried to speak but failed. Her throat was dry, her body heavy. She looked down. Clean bandages wrapped her midsection. A woolen blanket covered her body. Her dress had been replaced with a disc and shift, soft and warm. Ahioka brought a bowl of water and tilted it toward her lips. Eliza drank greedily. Your baby, the girl said softly, placing a hand over Eliza's belly, is strong. The spirits were watching over you. Tears welled in Eliza's eyes, hot and unrelenting. She turned her face to the side, ashamed and broken. He left me, she whispered, barely audible. Ahioka paused, then quietly stood and left the lodge. Moments later, another presence entered. Quiet footsteps. Calm, measured. Eliza turned her head and saw him. He stood tall, with broad shoulders and eyes like smoldering embers. His skin bore the sun's bronze, and his presence was more comforting than threatening. He did not speak at once, only bowed his head slightly, respectfully, as if acknowledging her pain. "I am Talon," he said, his voice low and even. "I found you near the ridge. You were barely breathing." Eliza looked away. "You should have let me die." "No," he replied simply. "You were not ready." She wanted to scoff, to laugh at the absurdity of her survival. But something in his voice, not pity, not judgment, stilled her tongue. He walked over to the fire pit, adjusted the flames with a stick, then stepped back into the shadows. "I will not ask your story," he said, turning to leave. "But if you wish to speak it, I will listen." And then he was gone. The next day passed slowly, but Eliza's strength returned little by little. She learned that she was in a Cheyenne camp tucked into a remote valley, sheltered from soldiers and settlers alike. The people moved with quiet discipline, not fearful, but vigilant. Ahioka stayed by her side. She told Eliza stories about the land, the trees, and the stars. She did not ask questions, only offered small truths to fill the silence. "He is quiet," Ahioka said once, smiling. "But he watches over those he saves." Eliza didn't ask who he was. She already knew. On the fourth night, Eliza sat outside for the first time, wrapped in a heavy shawl. A nearby stream glimmered in the moonlight. Crickets sang like a lullaby. And there, across the fire, sat Talon, carving a small wooden figure with a bone knife. She watched his hands, steady, careful, patient. "Why did you help me?" she asked suddenly, her voice rough but steady. Talon didn't look up. "Because life is sacred. You carry two." "That's not reason enough," she replied, more bitter than she intended. Now he did meet her gaze. "I have seen death steal too much. I will not offer it more than it deserves." Eliza looked down at her hands, now clean, no longer trembling. She thought of Thomas, how his last words had cut sharper than the blow to her skull. You were never part of the plan. Had she really meant so little? Talon stood and walked over. He crouched beside her and placed something in her hands. A small wooden figure, a bird in mid-flight. "For your child," he said. "Freedom begins with knowing you are not alone." Tears filled her eyes again, not from sorrow this time, but something harder to admit. Relief. The tight knot of despair that had gripped her chest for days began, slowly, to loosen. She clutched the bird to her heart, a quiet bond. The days lengthened, and the sharp edge of Eliza's pain began to dull. She moved with more ease now, rising with the sun, walking slowly beneath tall pines and golden skies. Her body still ached, but it was her heart that surprised her, beating again with rhythm, not regret. Though her trust had been shattered, here in this quiet world, surrounded by strangers who offered no judgment, she began to breathe freely. Ahioka became a sister in all but name. She taught Eliza to grind herbs, to wrap healing roots in leather, to hum lullabies older than any hymn Eliza had ever known. Laughter returned in small moments, like the bubbling creek, unexpected but welcome. Still, it was Talon who haunted her thoughts. Not with words, he rarely spoke, but in his presence, there was a steadiness that soothed something inside her she hadn't known was broken. He did not press her with questions. He simply was. Constant, grounded, gentle in strength. One morning, as Eliza sat weaving a bundle of dried sage, Talon approached with a bow slung over his shoulder. He stopped a respectful distance away. "I go to hunt," he said. "Will you walk with me? There's a place I wish to show you." She hesitated, but curiosity, and something deeper, a fragile spark of trust, pushed her to nod. They walked in silence at first, through a sun-dappled trail lined with red rocks and tall grass. Birds flitted overhead, Eliza stole glances at him, the way his eyes scanned the forest, alert yet calm, his movements purposeful but never rushed. Eventually, they reached a clearing high above the valley. Before them, the land stretched wide, a quilt of hills, forest, and river that shimmered beneath the sky. Talon pointed to a lone tree standing proudly on the ridge. "When I was a child, I came here with my father." He said the wind carried the voices of those who came before us. That when you listen, truly listen, you will hear what your heart is too afraid to ask. Eliza stepped forward. The wind tugged gently at her dress, brushing her cheeks like a mother's caress. "What do you hear?" she asked softly. Talon paused. "Today, I hear silence, and peace within it." She turned toward him. "I haven't heard silence in months. Only lies, and the sound of myself breaking." He looked at her then, not as a man looks at someone to possess, but as one sees a wounded bird learning to fly again. "You did not break," he said. "You were broken by someone. That is not the same." His words struck deep. Tears gathered in her eyes, but she blinked them away. He was supposed to be everything. My safety, my home. You were his. He forgot his honor. Talon's voice was calm but firm. A long silence passed between them, the kind that doesn't beg to be filled. Finally, she turned to him with a fragile smile. "And what do you do when the person who was your whole world leaves you behind in the date?" He stepped closer, slowly, not touching, not invading. Simply nay, you build a new world, stone by stone, breath by breath. You remember your name, and you speak it like a vow. Her name, Eliza. She had forgotten what it meant, not just the sound, but the strength beneath it. That evening, back at camp, she sat near the fire carving a second bird, smaller, imperfect. Talon passed by, glanced at the figure in her hands, and offered a faint smile. "You will make a fine teacher," he said, "for your child." The words caught her off guard. She looked down at her belly, which now moved with small signs of life, fluttering like wings beneath her skin. For the first time since that night, the betrayal, the desertion, she didn't feel cursed by what grew inside her. She felt chosen. Later that night, as the stars blanketed the sky, Eliza stepped outside alone. She looked toward the distant ridge, the wind whispering through the trees. And for the first time, she didn't just survive the silence. She welcomed it. The choice. The message came with the dawn. A scout from the Western Trail arrived on horseback, dust clinging to his cloak like old regret. He spoke to Talon in low Cheyenne, but Eliza recognized the name through the tension in the air. Thomas Granger. "He was found wounded near the Soldiers' Road," Talon said gently, later, when they sat beside the lodge. "A fever has taken him. He asked to see you." Eliza didn't speak. Her breath caught like a knot in her chest. She had imagined this moment in so many ways: rage, weeping, justice. But now that it was real, she felt nothing, or something dangerously close to it. Talon did not urge her. He simply said, "You don't owe him anything. But if you carry his shadow, it will follow your child too." She knew he was right. They traveled that afternoon. Ahioka packed herbs and fresh linens while Talon saddled the horses. The trail was short, but the silence between Eliza's heartbeats stretched across every mile. They found Thomas in a ramshackle encampment beside a burnt-out wagon. His skin was gray with sickness, his eyes sunken. He lay beneath a torn blanket, barely able to lift his head. When he saw Eliza, he coughed, smiled faintly. "You alive? I thought." "No," she cut in, her voice calm but cold. "You hoped I was dead." Thomas's smile faded. He tried to sit up but collapsed with a wheeze. "I didn't have a choice," he rasped. "I was desperate. I owed money. I thought if I left you, you'd be free," she finished. "Free from the life you built, free from the child you helped create." He looked away, shame finally dimming the flicker of manipulation in his eyes. "I've paid for it," he whispered. "I've lost everything." Eliza stepped closer, the breeze catching the hem of her dress like a flag of finality. "No," she said. "I lost everything, and I found myself again." She reached into her bag and pulled out something small, the wooden bird Talon had carved weeks ago. She set it beside Thomas's hand. This is the only part of me you'll carry now. A symbol, a warning, and a goodbye. Thomas closed his eyes. So this is it. Yes, she said, voice steady. This is freedom. She turned and walked away without looking back. The ride home felt different. The weight she'd carried since the betrayal, since that awful night beneath the stars, had finally lifted. The silence between her and Talon was no longer heavy. It was companionable, solid. That night, back in the village, Talon joined her by the fire. The stars were bold above them, and the night air was thick with pine and possibility. "Did you find what you needed?" he asked. She looked into the flames. "I found what I didn't know I deserved. Closure. Peace." Talon nodded slowly. "And what will you choose now?" Eliza turned toward him, her eyes reflecting the firelight. "I choose to stay. If the village will have me. If you will." Talon's gaze held hers for a long, quiet moment. He reached for her hand, not with urgency, but reverence. "I have waited for a woman with a warrior's spirit," he said. "You have faced death and chosen life. There is no greater strength." Eliza leaned her head against his shoulder, the heat of the fire warming her face, the steady beat of his heart grounding her soul. In that moment, there was no past. Only now. Only the heartbeat of the earth and the promise of what might come. Weeks later, she stood atop the same ridge he had once shown her, the one where the wind carried voices. The valley below bloomed with the early colors of spring. In her arms, her child stirred, swaddled in soft leather, cheeks flushed with new life. Ahioka stood nearby, smiling. Talon approached and wrapped his arm around Eliza's waist, their child resting peacefully between them. Eliza closed her eyes and listened, not for the voice of Thomas, not for the echo of betrayal, but for the sound of her own breath. Steady, alive, free.